Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Herschell Miller Show, a web series where I go over issues relating to the working class, American politics, international politics, and many other issues that relate to the current climate in today's world. Today I've got a pretty loaded, pretty heavy show ahead of us. Expect this episode to run at least an hour long. As always, if you're enjoying the content, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment down below, and I'll do my best to get to them to the end of the week when we do our Q&A video. So to start this off, we're going to go over a real hard topic first, and that is radicalism in American politics and how to deal with it. So it's no secret that in today's world, especially in the last few months, that we've witnessed, radicalism is growing in every direction at the same time. To the north, you have the National Socialists and the Communists. To the south, you have the Libertarians and the Anarchists. And it's pulling people that used to be centrists or moderates to the extremes. And I think it's worth an analysis as to why people are doing that. Because we like to imagine that these are just bad people that have no redeeming qualities, that they're just angry kids or racist hillbillies. But the issues are much deeper than that. And any analysis that fails to take in what's going on in the world today is sure to miss the mark. So, I thought I'd start by laying out a bit of history for this. So, America has been fortunate in one regard more than any, is that we have never had a very well-established radical party. Again, I always forget to do this, but I got to turn this phone on airplane mode. Okay. But we've never had a really well-established radical movement, with the exception of the Klan in the early 1920s, but even that never was total takeover of America's geopolitical system. But it was present, and I'll give it that. That is probably the most well-established extremist faction the United States had for a while. America's communist and socialist movements never really took root. America's fascist movement, it gained support in the 1920s and the 1930s, but it never really took hold into the scope of American politics in the way that the more centrist approach has usually dominated America's politics. And so what we're seeing today, people are looking for answers. Because, and I'm going to go through this ideology by ideology and some of the causes and some of the ideology behind it and some of the ways that I think that we can help it. So, these people who usually start from a middle perspective or a centrist perspective, who's not dedicated to one ideology or another, they're more, best of this ideology, best of that. So they, over the last couple of years, as the politics in America has greatly radicalized, and the rhetoric and the actions and the terrible things that have happened, such as Charlottesville. So, what do we do about it? Well, I think, like I said, I'm going to try to go through this all four, because any broad generalized statement. So, we'll start with the communist. So, it's no secret that inequality in America is a very real problem that we have today. Now, I get it. The standard Republican refutation to that argument is that inequality will always exist, and since we're all getting some of the pie, it's not that bad. But, historically speaking, even if you're right from a factual perspective, what happens historically, when inequality rises to a point that it's unstable, revolutions occur, and communism flourishes in environments such as these. So what happens is that as more and more Americans stack up on the bottom of the spectrum, which according to the Social Security Administration's number, I believe that the median income in the United States is $32,000 a year, which for those of you who don't understand what that means if you took all of the income earners in the United States and organized them by their amount of money they make every year, the person dead center in the middle would make $32,000. Well, the problem with this is that income is exponential. So if you can imagine, it tracks like this for a while, and if you imagine the median's about right here. And then after it crosses the median, it starts to climb and climb. And up here, even though there's only $30,000 difference, $32,000 difference in between the poorest income earner in the United States and the median, there's several $100 billion in between the median and the Jeff Bezos on the income chart. Now, this is a pretty universal chart. It's hard to find it because income is, like all things, based off of luck, of skill, of happenstance. There's 1,000 reasons that people don't make the same amount of money, and some are good because people that work harder, people that are more qualified. Some are bad, like nepotism, government regulations that have been imposed to help keep other people out. This is complicated. All this is complicated. But to the original point. So what happens in a system where more and more people start stacking up at the bottom is they lose their connection with those at the top. And America's billionaire class is definitely one of the more degenerate bunch that you could imagine, because the upper classes throughout history have generally not been very patriotic, to say the least. Most of them view their countries as nothing more than a marketplace. And when people, especially right now, who have lost their job due to no fault of their own, people who haven't had a significant raise in years, people working 2 or 3 jobs, when they see these ultra wealthy people that to them seem that they haven't worked for that they just were handed this amount of money, it breeds resentment. And again, I'm not here to say what's righteous and what's not. I'm just laying out the fact. So communists feed off of the inequality in this country. And what they do is, especially why they're so popular at universities, for example, is you get these kids, these young, impressionable kids that are just starting out in life, that they're attempting to learn the ways of the world and how it works. And they, for the first time in their life, in many cases, they are exposed to people that are not from their economic background. So, university is one of the greatest mixing or melting pots that you can find, because you'll have these ultra wealthy kids, doctors' kids, lawyers' kids, bankers' kids, very well off, and then you'll have people that got through there on academic scholarship that may have come from horrible backgrounds, poverty levels or sub-poverty levels, and it's these people mix with each other, and for the first time in their life they get to share stories about what has happened with each other, and you get this radicalism that starts occurring because young people are radical in the first place. We're the dreamers, the idealists. We believe that we can change the world, and I'm as guilty of that myself. The world's a hard place to ever make a difference in, but young people generally believe that they can, more than the older generations, I would say. So these communists, they start to look at the inequality that is taking place in this country from an empirical perspective, and they begin to formulate certain ideologies that inevitably do lead to a communist outlook in life. So what happens, what I'm trying to say, putting this all together, is that if your mode of operation or your beliefs are to build a more equitable system, a system that is more balanced top to bottom or completely balanced, even if you're an absolute idealist, then communism will eventually be your end goal, your final destination for an ideology. Excuse me for a second. It's really bad allergies in Oklahoma right now. I'm sorry if my sound stopped up. So, the ideology, it feeds off of inequality, and one of the ways to help solve that particular bit of ideological extremism is to help lower the inequality. Now, this does not mean implementing socialism. This does not mean stealing all of the wealth from everybody that's had something. This means understanding that if the bottom of your country stacks up in ever-increasing numbers at the bottom, and the median income continues to trend downward, which it has in the last couple of years when adjusted for inflation, it will breed resentment. Some of the things you can do to help this, and some of the things that have worked. Historically speaking, one of the best people that squashed communism for an entire lifetime was Otto Bismarck of the German Empire. Germany, if you don't know or weren't aware of this, was one of the first nations to implement a national health service, massive government work programs that help get the unemployed and the more poverty-stricken portion of the population to work. This helps suppress communist influencers because you took away their fuel. So you take the best weapon that communists have, which is inequality. You take that from them, and you build a more equitable system that allows people to feel like they're more able to advance themselves through hard work, dedication, and knowledge. See, because that's the whole thing. See, people aren't angry at inequality when they feel like they have a chance. So if I believe, which I'm fortunate enough that God has blessed me with a good enough head on my shoulders that I can do the work that's usually asked of me. I'm by no means intelligent. Don't ever think that I mistake what I'm saying for me trying to say that I'm intelligent. But I'm intelligent enough to do a job, especially a trade job. And I feel like I can advance myself through life because I've been afforded certain opportunities, that I was born with good parents that didn't set me back, and I generally have a positive outlook on life for myself and my family. But other people that feel like they have been stacked up at the bottom by name your oppressor. It could have been racism, it could have been outsourcing the jobs, it could have been a corrupt government, but they feel like they have been put at the bottom with no ladder to climb. And in point of fact, the United States' vertical mobility for the poorer people in this country is shrinking. Now, there's still vertical mobility from about the middle class and up, where opportunities start to compound upon themselves, and you end up with people that do rise up through the ranks pretty quickly to build very successful businesses. But your poorest of poor, abject poverty people generally get stuck in the area of where they were born at economically. Now, this is not to say that those that are disadvantaged amongst us have no chance, because there are exceptions to this rule. It's saying that by the larger percentage, people are increasingly stacking up at the bottom. So, let's build a system to combat communism in this instance. Combating communism, you build a system that is more equitable at the cost of some economic freedom at times, so that the stability of your country maintains. And this all goes back to the central point I'll get to in a minute. So now we're going to move on to the next one, which is the fascist, we'll just say. Now, I would like everybody who may be a fascist that watch this to hear me when I say this. I have read your works. I think I have a generally good understanding of what fascism is and what it isn't. So I'm not going to try to pigeonhole you. But I'm going to talk about you the same that I did the communist. So fascism is a doctrine that feeds off of not inequality in the way that communism does, but incompetence is the better way to say it. So what a fascist looks around and sees in the democratic system, in a democratic system, is they see a system where it's corrupt, bureaucracy is rampant, that is ineffective for the people themselves, whose businesses don't work for them, who work for themselves, who the country suffers due to freedom. But I believe that they take it a step way too far with the totalitarianism, which is kind of the reaction to a democratic system and its flaws, is to go totalitarian, to go to autocratic dictator control and the destruction of democracy. And see, like I said, they feel that the government has failed them. That because the government is weak, that because the government is ineffective, because the government is riddled with bureaucracy, that what they need to build is a government with a strong central leader that is infallible, that is heroic, that will lead their country out of whatever trouble that they're in at the moment. And some of the ways that I believe that you could help. And now, a common theme to all of this will be jobs. People that have jobs generally are less radical. But some of the things in the United States I think you could fix is for the state, for the government. Well, first of all, you've got to get better oversight in many of our government agencies, and you've also got to get a government that is both strong enough to handle issues when stuff is spiraling out of control, and weak enough to allow enough personal freedom, and that's the great balance in history. But you have to the inequality, not the inequality, the ineffectiveness is the hardest one, I believe, out of all four that I'm going to go over to account for, because we are democratic in our beliefs. We believe in the principles of democracy, of equal representation, and I'm going to divide fascism into two categories here. You have those that are disaffected by the ineffectiveness of our system. Then you have those that wish to take advantage through an authoritarian system. I can't help this, because this is something that is totally alien to our system. So the ones that are disaffected, you need to meet what they're saying is our government, and it's been shown in the last couple of months with the virus, it has just failed at every step. And the fact that it's failed in such a spectacular way has led many people to seek a state that is stronger. So we need to build these stronger institutions as a people, so that people are less likely to seek out more authoritarian alternatives for their own problems. As that means, seek out more authoritarian systems to replace democracy. As far as the ethnic nationalist, I would say, there's really not much I can do to help you. That's something that you can't educate out of. That's just a fundamentalist belief in something, and they either grow out of it or they turn into Richard Spencer. And I said libertarian earlier, but what I meant was the furthest extreme of libertarianism, which is anarcho-capitalism, which is the belief in no state, in total private, unfettered industry. These people are freedom fundamentalists, if you would say. Absolute freedom all the time. Now, as much as I disagree with the core fundamental principles of the system, I think that it's at least worthy of talking about. So the ANCAP, for short, they are people that are totally disaffected by the government in the opposite way that a fascist is. So a fascist is mad at the incompetence of a government. An ANCAP is somebody that is disgusted by the overreach of the state. So some of their common arguments is that overtaxation, the fact that our government is woefully corrupt, that stifles small business, that is overburdening average people, that the police force is out of control. There's a lot of basically anti-government sentiment is the anarcho-capitalist creed, that anything government is bad. Now, these people, and again, I give everybody that I talk about the benefit of the doubt that these people have arrived at this conclusion because something in their life has happened that has pushed them to an extreme. I'm not trying to say these are bad people. I'm saying these are people with issues that we have to address. Otherwise, this will spiral out of control. So the anarcho-capitalist is somebody that needs to be shown that the government is not always totally worthless, that there are good things. And the problem is because our government has been, since the government has been so ineffective over the last century, at least the last 50 years, and has left such a poor taste in so many people's mouths, it's going to take massive reforms. Now, I'm not going to bend the knee and just give these people whatever they want. Anybody. Anybody that I talk about in this particular segment. But a certain amount of give and take is required for any negotiation. And stuff like reevaluating the tax code to ensure that our tax dollars are being spent as efficiently as possible in the right proportions. Business regulations that are important for the safety of the environment and the people, but not for the benefit of larger corporations that can pay for the regulations. Of personal freedoms, like what are we regulating people putting in their own bodies? What narcotics or other substances, I'll say, are beneficial to the individual that don't hurt the community, and which ones are damaging to the community to the point that they need to be removed. These are conversations that we need to have. So with the ANCAPs, we need to find the ground in freedom. Now, these people are not going to talk to us, or at least the more radical bunch of them, but they are American citizens, and their voice is as important as anybody's, and we need to talk to these people. And the dialogue, and the dialogue with all of these is important, because we need to pull these people back the best we can. Now, I'm by no means a centrist myself. I have deep-seated beliefs and fundamentals that I believe in. So I'm not saying who's better or who's worse. I'm just saying that once you get out to a certain point, you lose your humanity the farther that you get out, because you become an ideologue, totally focused on an ideology and its tenets, and you forget the nuance of the conversation. So with the ANCAPs, you need to reestablish faith with them that the government is not totally worthless, which is going to take a long time to fix. I'm not taking that away from them, but we need to pull these people back, because these people are violent revolutionaries at the end of the day. These are the people that, if you ever see the memes on Facebook that are talking about boog boys and the big igloo clubs, like, these are who they're talking about, or at least they're either extreme or more extreme libertarians or ANCAPs, usually, generally speaking. These are the people that, although I doubt how serious most of them are about actual revolution in this country, these are people that you usually see from the right perspective, the right wing perspective of revolutionary. And if you continue to ignore them and continue not to take their demands into account, they will eventually get the nerve up to do what they're talking about. Okay. The last one of the four I'm going to talk about is the left anarchist. Now, there is a great debate that goes on between whether or not what communism means for the left. Now, again, a communist is not anybody left of Rush Limbaugh. Communism is its own ideology, and it's a very diverse ideology. There's everybody from tankies, Stalinists, to Trotskyites, to communist anarchists. Like that, this is a very wide and diverse spectrum of people, and I'm not at any point going to try to shoot one, but I'm going to focus this part of it on the actual anarchist leftist, which is generally the most visceral or visual or represented leftist in today's America, because you don't see as many actual Stalinists, which are people that believe that the USSR was good. Most of the communists that you see on America's campuses today are left anarchists. Various degrees, but the family, like the black bloc, you see that, the black clothes, face mask. It's, again, and trying to shoehorn or stereotype any of these is not beneficial, so I'm going to do my best. Now that I've gotten that out of the way and established, the left anarchists. So left anarchists share similarities with the top and similarities with the libertarians, if you're going by the political compass, which is not a very accurate test, but for purposes of this video, it's kind of what I'm generally using for the corners. So, your anarchist left. There's two things that they hate. They hate inequality, and they hate government. And that is generally true with any branch of left anarchist. So the inequality, they hate that power and privilege is hereditary. They hate hierarchies, especially what they consider unjust hierarchies. They also despise governments because they view that all governments are fascistic in nature, or at best hyper-authoritarian to them. Very internationalist, usually very humanitarian. These are people that are hyper-individualistic and hyper-anti-hierarchy. And they are the hardest to get to, because for them, nearly anything that a government does will be seen as a bad thing in their eyes. And nearly all of the markets, the capitalist system that we live in today is against their worldview. So, how do we even begin to do this? And to this one, I really don't know the answer. Now, I believe that, like all things, more jobs help. Reducing inequality helps. having more government accountability also helps. But this is going to be the group of people that are never going to be willing to reach out. And I'm not saying that in an angry way or a condescending way. I'm saying that it is against your fundamental nature, or the anarcho-leftists, it's against their fundamental nature. That everything to them is an oppressive system, or everything to them is an unjust hierarchy, or it's hard. These are the most radical of the younger generations by a long shot. And I'm not trying to disparage them. In case any of you ever watch this video, I want to know that I generally love to have a dialogue with you. And I'm not going to try to straw man your arguments here, which is why I'm kind of resisting any of the normal, Turning Point USA talking points. But about 5 minutes relating on this subject, I want to kind of wrap this up. So as I've kind of tried to explain in all 4 of the examples given, is that these people, they feed off of instability and inequality. And if you think back to the French Revolution, to the Bolshevik Revolution, to the revolutions of 1848 across Europe, these revolutions happened because of many issues that would take days to explain, but it is instability as a concept of where all of these come from. And as a nation destabilizes, people from the center, who usually don't have skin in the game, look for people to give them answers to questions that they can't answer themselves. And what I dislike about all 4 of these, in general, and this is not a blanket statement, but this is just what I have, the general consensus that I have found to dislike about the political extremes, is that they seem to try to give simple answers to hyperly complex questions. You cannot end inequality completely, because inequality is as fundamental to nature as, it is as fundamental as gravity. That everything can be laid out on a spectrum of inequality. The heights of trees, the sizes of ants, the sizes of stars, the athletic ability of certain individuals, intelligence, all of this is on a logarithmic curve. So inequality will never be ended, no matter how many systems you seek to destroy. Government will continue to exist, because government is as human as humanity itself, because civilization was born from systems of governance. Because not everybody can rule everything at the same time. You need laws, you need rules, you need regulations, you need higher authority to solve disputes. Government will always be corrupt, because power corrupts. But these people try to give simple answers to these very complex questions. And they miss the point entirely, is that there is no easy fix. But what happens is, especially because political extremists are almost always very young, almost always under 30 years old. And the reason for that is because at that age, younger than 30, you're finding out who you are. You're looking forward in life, and you're looking for these simple answers. You see a problem, inequality. You don't know how to solve it yourself. You're just a kid, probably have never been that well educated. And I'm not saying that you're stupid. I'm saying that you probably never read the classic works. You never read much philosophy out of high school. And now you're getting into the world and you're seeing this inequality and you're thinking, oh, well, that's terrible. And it is. Inequality, when it gets to its extremes like it is now, is a terrible thing because it destabilizes a country. But you find somebody, some Marxist-inspired thought, philosopher, or maybe Marx himself, where Marx makes these brutal critiques of capitalism and the system itself. And these are, and this is one thing I want to say, I'm not saying that these critiques aren't good critiques of the system. It's easy to find what's wrong with something. What's hard is to have actual answers to the problem. So these people give these scathing reviews of various systems and what's wrong with them, and generally they're right. I'm not saying that these people are all idiots, because anybody that believes that being a Marxist makes you economically illiterate hasn't met many educated Marxists. These people make very compelling arguments to the problems with inequality and with capitalism in general. The fascists, they make very compelling arguments about the authority of the central state. The libertarians about personal freedom. The anarchists about humanity. These people make good arguments. they just come with a lot of other stuff. Okay, so that's 30 minutes. So we're going to call that the end of this first segment. I'm going to take about a 5-minute break, and then I'm going to continue recording. Okay. So for this next segment, it won't be near as long as the first, but it's an issue that's worth talking about. And it is media influence. So, in today's climate especially, and definitely since Trump started his campaign in 2015, it's been very clear that the media has a very influential role and a very positive bias. And this is all media. This is not, I'm not picking on Fox or CNN. I'm saying that both of them really suck about this issue. And that, what people found out is that these news agencies that they trusted for, generations, for, some people, that they weren't as honest as they thought they was. And it's an issue that we really need to discuss, because there's another, and kind of going off at the end of the last point, is there's no simple solutions to this problem. But one thing that I want people to understand is that media has always had an influence on culture and politics. From when people could write, or write plays, or write songs, these things influence people. And I want you to think about that for a second with yourself. What has inspired you to believe the way that you do? Because it's almost certainly not by just thinking it up yourself. And this goes for anybody, that there's communist or fascist or Republican or Democrat or liberal or conservative or whatever it is. Almost everybody is influenced by outside sources, and they kind of pick, this piece and this piece, and they put together what they believe. So this is an issue that's as old as time, that isn't going to go away anytime soon, but it is worth the observation. So I'd like to make this clear. Anybody that thinks media is fake news, or this is the worst that the news agencies have ever been, has a very limited understanding of the history of media. For those who don't know who William Randolph Hearst is, he was one of the yellow journalists that basically got the United States into the Spanish-American War by lying about the USS Maine explosion in the port of Havana. These people lied the United States into a war. Same thing happened in Vietnam. Same thing happened in Desert Storm. The invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan. Like, these media is very important and very influential into the common discourse and how people conceive the world. It's by no accident that the 20th century was one of the most progressive centuries on Earth. As far as how much society drifted towards progressivism or liberalism in the course of one century. And it's no accident that this was also the century of radio and television, of basically unlimited information in comparison to what the older generations experienced with the pen and the paper and the newspaper. And our generation is going to experience even harder transitions with the age of the internet, because you can find any ideology and anybody supporting nearly any perspective somewhere in some corner of the internet. So media plays this important role, and I can't remember who it was, but they said, without Will and Grace on TV, gay marriage wouldn't have become near as accepted in the 90s. These things are important. And so I want to say that I'm caught in the middle on this, of the how we go about handling this. So on the one side, you have the people that say that we should regulate what these news outlets are able to say. Now, I want to give them the credit of arguing for their perspective the best I could without trying to stereotype them, as always. So their argument is the instability that is caused by yellow journalism is more destructive than the restriction of free speech. So they say that, Trump's a good example. Trump has done some things that I very, very much am opposed to. The tax breaks that we got in 2018 that basically just benefited the top income earners, didn't help the middle class near as much, when the middle class was the one that were needing the bigger tax break. I have issues with Trump. legitimate issues and gripes and grievances against him. But at the same time, the media's outright assault on the president, at times lying at the worst of times or misconstruing the facts, the rest of it, it has hurt this country's dialogue because nobody knows what to trust anymore. Because, for example, the media has been trying to tell people to stay home, to wear their mask, but nobody trusts the media. Nobody trusts the government officials like Dr. Fauci. And it's because of the last couple of years of people watching how the media treated Donald Trump. And it's undeniable of the influence. I mean, or the bias. I mean, Russiagate, prime example, where we seen Rachel Maddow get up on our show every night talking about how just tomorrow they were going to arrest Trump, that they had positive information that Donald Trump was colluding with the Russians and that there was no way that Trump would finish even the next year. And she wasn't the only one, but she definitely was the most annoying voice on this. And that never happened. Now, Russiagate's its own crap sandwich entirely, and I'm not even going to begin to dive off into that creek. But the point is that the media did play to their own agendas about their opinion on Donald Trump. Now, Fox News done the same thing to President Obama. Don't misunderstand me for thinking that the more progressive media outlets are the only ones that do this. I mean, Fox, everybody remembers the tan suit fiasco. And, I'm not a fan of Sean Hannity at the best of times. So, what I'm saying is that media, they argue that the media bias is more dangerous than the restriction of free speech. That they say that we have to have credibility in the news. Otherwise, we end up with radicalism. We end up in the situation we're in now, where nobody trusts anybody. So, I understand the argument. Now, let me give the other side. The other side of this argument is that it is more dangerous to have the government do factual oversight, basically, to ensure that these media outlets are only reporting the true facts and that we're not letting the media outlets influence with their own bias. And they even understand. I mean, again, I'm giving everybody the best credit that I can. That these people understand that there is an influence that journalism has with certain amount with bias, and it does influence and it does hurt the nation as a whole. But they say it is more dangerous to allow the state to regulate what speech is acceptable. And they say good examples is people like Julian Assange, people like Edward Snowden, various journalists that have pulled back the covering on big government conspiracies and secrets over the last 100 years. And had these people been denied their right to free speech because the information at the time was not credible, as far as was not backed up by corroborating sources, these people would never have been able to break these big stories, and thus these things would still be government secrets buried in some back corner office. And they say that it should be this way, that it should be up to the individual to decide what is good information, not. And I tend to side more with them. And why I side with them is because I do agree with the fundamental point of this, is that governments cannot always be relied upon to give good, credible information. In fact, they can hardly ever be relied on to give information like this. I mean, we've seen how our government's lied to us about the situation in the Middle East for quite some time. Sorry for that brief interruption. So as I was saying, the government is very poor at the best of times on giving the credible information. So in my belief, it is better to allow a certain amount of bad information to be injected into the conversation, understanding, of course, that isn't one of the reasons that we are in such unstable times that we're in now. And I'm not saying for one second that I don't understand the other argument. It's that, to me, the more dangerous of the two is to allow the government to be the arbiter of true information. I mean, all one has to do is study some of the confirmed conspiracy theories that happened in the last 50 years to see that our government has been maniacal at the best of times. So, what we could do going forward, I think, is something that I would support. Is I do believe in a bit more, or a bit of an expansion in what legally is defined as slander in situations between individuals. For elected officials, there's nothing that you can do, because anything that you try to do is going to make the situation 10 times worse. Because you can't tell me that state-run Chinese media is more honest than U.S. media, or that they slander people any less. They just get away with it because they're government-approved radio or news agencies. So it's a rock and a hard place. You could say that maybe allowing the government to put more pressure on companies that are government funded, but even that's a slippery slope to get down. One thing I do think wouldn't be a horribly idea is even a publicly funded fact-checking organization is going to have its own biases in it. It's something I don't have simple answers to. And I wish more than anything that I did. I wish that I could wave a magic wand and do away with the slander and the lies and the other terrible things that go on in this country that we wish to fix as far as media is concerned. What do you do with somebody like Alex Jones that claimed that a bunch of kids that were killed in a mass shooting were what was the word that he used? Crisis actors. I mean, the man should legitimately be beat near to death for that, saying something that horribly stupid. And I'm not kidding about that. Alex Jones is a worthless piece of crap as a human. And there's no redeeming qualities that I could find in anybody that could look at something like that and think, automatically just go to crisis actors instead of the fact that them kids really did die. And them parents had to bury all of them. And the scars from that are still left today. And in the way that I believe, you're going to have your Alex Joneses, and you're going to have your communist and fascist sympathizers that misconstrue history into whatever fits their own narrative. You're going to have people like Charlie Kirk at TPUSA that use grade school history to convince a bunch of people of their own, whatever they're trying to push at the time. I mean, none of this is probably the grimmest subject that I've covered on the show so far, about long shot. And it's such a bad subject because, like I said, and I want to reiterate, that there's no easy solutions to any of this. I mean, if you have a solution, please leave it in the comments, and I'd love to discuss your perspective. In fact, one of the interviews I'm probably going to do Saturday, I'm probably going to talk about this very subject. It's just, like I said, rock in a hard place. No easy solutions, no easy way out, and nobody can give a guaranteed answer that would make the situation any better than what it is now. The only thing that I will absolutely agree with is that media is the biggest influence of cultural change that there is. If you look at how programming generally precedes a larger movement in the United States, you could think that the gay movement in the United States really come out of a lot of the film industries from the late 90s, early 2000s to today is wider spread acceptance of the gay movement, definitely, or anti-religious views generally came out of Hollywood's various apparatuses. Again, media is absolutely a driver of culture, and anybody that denies that fact is either ignorant of the influence or willfully lying about it. And media is a very powerful institution in itself for nefarious purposes, definitely. You think how Goebbels, under the Nazi leadership, weaponized propaganda to convince untold numbers of Germans to do whatever he wanted to. Stalin and Lenin the same way, with their control of the film industry in Soviet Union. In Americas, the CIA influences on anti-communist movies in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. These are deep problems. I think that's about as good. I only got about 15 seconds left on this clip anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next one. So, hold on a second. What's my next one? Drug companies. this is one that I'm actually going to really enjoy going over because it's one of the where I not expert on, but definitely where I feel one of the more comfortable ones. So the American healthcare system is broken in many, many ways. It's both overregulated and underregulated at the same time somehow. I don't know how we managed to find that horrible balance, but we have. So what's overregulated in is that the government has set up natural monopolies for many medical companies that have, which I'm going to focus on this segment, which is the pharmaceutical companies. The government has set up these natural monopolies that allow these pharmaceutical companies to charge exorbitant amounts of money for whatever they want to, even though the medication itself doesn't cost anything hardly for them to make. And at the same time, the government, the United States, spends more money than anybody else in the world on healthcare per capita and has one of the worst healthcare systems in the developed world, if not the worst. I think out of first world countries, we are dead last. And this is a crappy system all the way to the top. And there's definitely no easy answer on this one, because I would tell people to be apprehensive about trying to apply European or Canadian style systems to America, because it's apples to oranges at times. I mean, the United States is a country of well over 350 million people that covers an area, I believe, larger than Europe itself, as far as if you take, I need to check that again. It's a very large area to go over, and high population density at times. And this feeds into economics. I mean, like I said, I'm not saying it's impossible to do. I'm saying that just saying that they done it so we can do it is a bad argument. You have to apply lessons to America, learn from America in a kind of a dialectical fashion. You have to see, well, what worked and what didn't for here, but trying to say what worked for Canada will work for here, it's an argument that's going to end up in some really bad policies. So America's healthcare system, being as broken as it is, and needing massive reform, but the pharmaceutical industry is probably the one that sticks out the worst, because unlike pricing issues with hospitals that definitely need to be addressed themselves, that's an insurance problem as much as it is anything, and government regulation. Again, giving everybody the best arguments I can. But pharmaceutical companies sit in a really bad spot because R&D for pharmaceutical companies isn't as common as you think. A huge portion of our medication comes out of universities from around the United States and overseas, which means that a lot of the medication in this country is funded through our public universities, is developed through our public universities, and then is bought by these patent companies who change small, insignificant molecular structure or chemical structures of these drugs that they'll put an ingredient in there that doesn't have any active effects, but it is changing the medication itself enough that they can patent it. And then the way the patent laws work, again, it allows these companies to get away with charging $500 for a vial of insulin or $50 for a pill that cost them 3 cents to make. And again, they didn't put the R&D into this either. So they are making out like bandits off of our taxpayer dollars and then overcharging the taxpayer back again when we have to cover this through Medicaid. And I think, again, it's like always. A two-pronged approach is the better way to solve most problems. You take what's true for the libertarian perspective, which is that governments are over-regulating the medical industry at times in certain areas that needs to be addressed. The FDA system itself needs to be massively streamlined. The healthcare billing, stuff like this stuff needs to be reworked on the regulation, not to the point, not in ways that endanger patients, but in a way that relieves the bureaucracy of the system. And on the other hand, we don't need to be allowing private companies to utilize government funding to develop these products and then overcharging us to death. Now, I can see the argument for allowing private companies to buy medication research from the government under license to produce it. So, what the free market, or what markets do better than governments generally, is distribution of goods. It's not always true. There are problems with it. There are problems with especially food. Food is one thing that is not always great. But generally speaking, the distributions of good by the market forces are, I'm going to say, better most of the time. You could say that a company would be better at getting a factory set up and then doing the logistics to get it here and then selling it at a set price to hospitals. And I emphasize set price. The reason I say that is because we have to understand, somewhat earlier when I talked about radicalism in politics, is that our healthcare system is one thing that is driving the radical influence in this country as much as anything. Because when you have a healthcare system that is last in the developed world and costs more than any other in the developed world, well, obviously there's an issue there. See, if the United States was spending the least in the developed world and getting the worst, well, at least then you're getting your bang for your buck. But if you are mortgaging out, way out there in the price ranges, as far as how much you're spending and then versus quality, well, something's obviously wrong. Now, one thing that I do disagree with libertarians on is the fact that the developed world, and again, how I led this, I said that taking anything and trying to apply it directly to America and believing that'll work without a hitch fails to understand kind of the American experience in general. But I will say this, is the government-run healthcare systems seem to be more efficient and better at getting care to more people. Maybe not always better quality on the individual basis, but if you're not getting any health care at all, well, that really doesn't matter about the quality then. Because I know it from my own personal life. I've got medical problems at times that have popped up in my life that I wish I had insurance, but I just either didn't have a job that gave good enough insurance or didn't have a job, which led me to just suffering through health issues. Again, it's complicated. I will never try to paint complicated subjects as simple. I am simply trying to talk through them. And this is as much a dialogue process for myself as well. So with the healthcare system, one of the things that governments do generally do better about price control is because they can guarantee a set price that doesn't allow corporations to overcharge. Because if corporations want to be the ones to hold the patents on these, they need to play by our rules. Because I don't want people having to buy generic insulin and then dying of it, or people that can't afford pain meds that have to suffer, or people that can't afford blood pressure medicine, or name your thing. And before you say, well, just get on Medicaid, well, that really doesn't solve the problem. That just means now the taxpayers are paying excessive amounts of money for this medication. So we need a regulating agency to come in and start setting these prices, and understanding that corporations, if we're going to continue to run a private healthcare system, still have to make money. Again, that's the argument is that if we're going to stick with the private healthcare system, we are going to have to add more government oversight into the equation in certain areas, like price control, because we can't allow these people. What was it? What was it, like 300,000 or 400,000 medical bankruptcies a year, or something like that? 50,000 people a year die of lack of health care coverage. Like, these are terrifying stats. And there definitely needs to be somebody to fix, because every day that we don't fix this, another radical is born when they get a $50,000 medical bill for, I don't know, a heat stroke or something like that. For example, for me, I caught what I believe was a really bad flu back in January. I was 104.5 degrees, and I fought it off for 2 or 3 days, trying not to die. My wife finally made me go to the hospital, and I get down to the hospital, and mind you, it's 17 or 18 degrees outside when I finally went. I had to call my dad to take me because I was so hot I couldn't see anymore. I couldn't reliably drive, I'd say. So I get down there, and they put me in a waiting room. They take my temperature. I'm about 103.2 at the time. They put me in an actual emergency room for 2 or 3 hours. They swab my nose, come back an hour later, tell me I have the flu, get well soon. No medication, no long length of treatment. The hospital wasn't overflowing with patients at this point. $850 bill. Now, where in that did I cost that hospital $850? Because they didn't cost me any medication, and them tests cost nothing. I guess taking up that room for a minute and the swab, and I get it, cost them a little bit of money. I'm not taking that away from them. Let's not act like $850 for them telling me to get well soon was worth the money. It's something has to be done. It's the steps that we have to take to help getting a better healthcare system, and it's going to take a lot of voices. We need to build a system that serves more people. We need to figure out how to control the price and give the best service at the same time, and that is going to be the eternal balance between government intervention and market forces. And if we can find that balance, I believe that the United States, there's nothing stopping us from having one of the best healthcare systems in the world. Now, I'm also going to put this little side note in here. America as a population, we're not always the healthiest people. Obesity is a problem, diabetes is a problem in our nation. So I don't ever suspect that America is just going to magically have the world's best healthcare system, because we don't have the world's healthiest people. But we can build a better system. I think that the cooperation between the medical industry and the government, with the goal of building a better system together, understanding that if we don't, it's all going to fall in on itself. Because we can't have, and again, I believe it was 400,000 medical bankruptcies a year. That's a horrifying statistic. And not an insignificant portion of that comes from prescription medication. Now that means 400,000 people a year get put out of their homes, or at least get close enough to losing all of their assets. And these people are generally the poorest amongst us, so let's not act like these are rich people that are suffering this either. I just want to build a better system. And I want to build a better system, and the voices are needed. Now, I've been rambling about this one for a little bit, but I want to close with some positive words. Over the last couple of weeks, I've been getting into this, getting back into really building the organization, to really trying to make a difference. And the upswelling of support that we've had over the last couple of days has really made me genuinely happy. And as we go forward, this is a project that was started with the express intent of working class people raising their voices together to demand change in various things and to find solutions to problems that have been so long ignored by the upper classes and the wealthy, privileged elite all over the country. I encourage you, anybody watching this video, that no matter your political disposition, no matter what ideological figure you adhere to, raise your voice. Raise it and send in a voice clip to me so I can respond to it. Message me, email me. Raise your issue. Your voice matters. And the old movie, All the King's Men, they had Lord, I'll remember here in a minute. But in the movie, there was one of the main character of the movie, the protagonist of the movie. He had this quote when he was giving a stump speech that said, "If you don't vote, you don't matter." And I wanted to go a little further than that. If you don't raise your voice, you don't matter. We will and have to be the change that this country needs in the next couple of years. Because what you see going on in Washington right now is case in point. These people have no interest in actually helping us. So as we close, I want you to think about all the ways that you can help in your local community. What you can do to help the people around you, whether it be soup kitchens, food drives, or just helping an old lady carry her groceries to the car. Because that's the change that we're going to need in this country. Now, I want to thank those of you who took the time out of your day to watch this video. It means more to me than you can ever understand, to see the likes, to see the comments, to see the views, because I feel like I'm actually making a difference. That being said, I want to thank you. May God bless you, and may you have a wonderful week.